Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our session on attracting, sustaining, and supporting new teachers. Lindsay and I are both involved in the work at our ESD and find this a pretty important role in education and for teachers, especially right now. I know that there is a lot of change and a lot of opportunity happening in schools around the region. So before we get started, we wanted to introduce ourselves a little bit, and then we're also going to ask you to think back to your first year teaching. Dream making is kind of one of the ways that I like to define this role of bringing on new teachers, because we get to help them find their voices and help them find their direction and guide them towards the things that they're excited about. And so our role when we are doing hiring or induction and onboarding new teachers, it really is this idea of being a dream maker and making things happen for them. So in just a minute, we're going to ask you to share in the chat. I was thinking back to my student teaching and who my dream maker was. And it was actually the teacher next door when I was student teaching. I can't say that I had the most amazing student teaching experience, but the teacher next door, she was the one who opened her door and invited me in, sat with me anytime I asked or needed resources. And she was the person who really kind of inspired me and got me started. And I can date myself by saying she was a whole language teacher. So we were doing whole language at the time. But she was that person for me who really kind of got me thinking about what I could do in teaching and what I could do with students and how I could pass that along. So Lindsay, how about you?
I had a few people my first year teaching that were pretty instrumental in helping me learn the way. One of them was my principal, actually. He kind of took me under his wing and really was great about making sure I felt supported and making sure that I had everything I needed. And so I really appreciate him. I also had a great team. I was lucky to work with 5 other teachers, and we had co-planning time, and that was invaluable for a first-year teacher to be able to plan together. We did it once a week during our planning time, and we could bump into each other and ask for resources, and I can't imagine not having had a team like that my first year.
The team is definitely important. And finding your team and finding that community. So I'm going to ask our participants if anyone would drop into the chat. Who was your dream maker and who supported you and helped you in that first year? And what did they do that was so important? Self-contained special education class. A paraprofessional was your dream maker that she'd been in that class for years. It comes in unexpected places. Anyone else? Who is your dream maker? I always want to go back and write thank you notes to these folks 20, 30-ish years later. I'm embracing I can't say awkward Zoom, but hoping to hear more stories and see more stories and see more connections to the dream makers. So when we think about where induction begins, it really begins in our hiring needs when we consider our district needs, paired with that recruitment that we do for teachers and placing teachers in those optimal assignments when we're intentional about the placement for them, and also designing the experience for them. Looking at that, one of the things that research has shown is that there is a cost to hiring teachers. And Lindsay's going to share a link for you to explore here in just a second. But on average, when an urban district is hiring a teacher, the average cost of hiring a new teacher is $20,000. And that covers the hiring, the marketing, the people power, the expenses and training that you invest in that teacher during the time that they're hired that first year, and then also any expenses related to their induction and then their separation. So when you're starting over. So Lindsay just dropped into a chat. There is a quick calculator that you can try out and explore, and it'll show you for rural schools and for urban schools, and give you an idea of what it costs in your area for teacher turnover. And when we think about those dollars that we would love to spend somewhere else, this is where I really feel that, that induction and that hiring practice really supports them.
It was amazing looking at this calculator, Jen, to figure out exactly that turnover and what it would cost a district to retrain new teachers and how much you could save and use elsewhere if you were able to retain those high quality teachers that you wanted to retain in your school.
So orientation is our other topic, and another place where induction really begins.
And orientation activities are essential in sharing those policies, all those practices and things that teachers need in their first year of instruction, and all the other pieces too. Where do I get my medical insurance? All those kinds of things. But we really want to focus on the instruction and best practices with instruction and classroom management, and how to develop great relationships from the start with our students. And I think it's really important to prepare our new teachers for their first days and weeks and help them prioritize what is it that they need to start off with their students.
And I think culture is another key piece of that we're looking for, and how to share the culture of our district and our communities. And sometimes even identifying that culture can be difficult, or it could be easy, depends on where you are. But introducing teachers to your community and helping them find their voice and the voice of the community, and recognizing how to connect. How do you share the history of your community and where some of the emphasis and programs have come from? How do you give them those possibilities and opportunities to explore? And then where can they meet people? Where can they connect? And where that happens inside a building or inside of the district, or whether it's happening outside. I know for some rural communities, exploring the community and finding those places where everyone hangs out and helping them connect to the community. It's not just the culture of your building, but even the extended community that you have. So definitely so important for everyone. So thinking about all those.
All right. We have created for you a note taker that you can use throughout this session, and it is going to force you to make your own copy. So feel free to type in any of the fields and use it as you wish. And Jen just dropped that in the chat for you. So we'll be going through this note-taking template and stopping along the way to fill in different pieces and looking at the resources that we included on that. So if you will go ahead and get that open so that you are ready to use that note taker, that would be fantastic. And if it's not working for you, please let us know in the chat. But it will force you to make your own copy so you can use that as we go along. And if somebody could give us a heads up that, yes, I'm able to get into it, I've got my copy in the chat, that would be fantastic so we know. Oh, good.
Shelly and Kayla.
Yay, thank you. It's always, when we can't see your faces or hear from you, it's always difficult to know if it's working or not. So I'm glad to see that it is.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I actually am missing Zoom just a little bit.
I'm missing Zoom a little bit too, Jen. This is a different platform for us, and that we're not used to presenting on. So I appreciate your patience, everybody.
So if you take a close look at that note taker, it has 3 sections on it that are going to be the areas that we're talking about today. And in each section, we're going to ask you to share your experience or your understanding before we share on that topic. And then we're going to engage in some discussion and opportunities and resources. And then we're going to ask you to reflect on that and share what you're wondering or what you're thinking about for the following. One of my areas of interest is neuroscience, and so I have to always put the plug in where I can. And neuroscience tells us that when we activate that prior knowledge, we help to instill new knowledge into our long-term memory and into those opportunities. So I had to put the plug in for neuroscience there.
Something to carry over to classrooms too.
That's great.
All right. We are going to be using a continuum today with some of our questions to rate where our school or district is at in terms of supporting new teachers. And this comes from a larger analysis tool that Jen and I developed that we're going to share with you at the end of our session today, so you'll be able to see all of the questions. But today we're just going to share pieces of it and have you reflect on that continuum. And you can see that it runs from a 1 to a 5, with a 1 being unaware and a 5 being integrating, so you're fully, you have a fully sustainable system that responds to future needs. But we want you to know that this is not good or bad if you're a 1 or a 2. This is just a starting place for you in these areas. And maybe you don't know the answer with your school or your district, and that's okay too. But we will be sharing the whole thing later today and give a copy of that to you so that you have it. But we will take questions from the analysis tool to look at one at a time under each category.
And the calibration I dropped into chat, but this will show up, this continuum will show up on each one of our question slides today. So you don't have to memorize it or take a screenshot of it. It'll show up every time.
Good point. Thanks, Jen. And we're going to be looking at 3 of the pieces on the larger analysis tool today. We're going to look at belonging, efficacy, and support. But when you get the entire tool later at the end of the session, you'll see an induction category 2. So we're taking a look at the 3: belonging, efficacy, and support.
Belonging, we put belonging first because that's one of the first ways that we want to, when we're attracting teachers and retaining teachers, is to really engage and have them belonging and feeling like they are connected to the district and to our work. So before I start talking about this section, would you please take out your note taker? I feel like now I do feel like a teacher back in the classroom, and write down your thoughts on your note taker about how you're feeling about belonging and how it relates to your understanding. And we're going to take about 2 minutes. About 1 more minute. So when we're not going to ask people to share their initial thinking, but it really is just for you to think about what your understanding and what you're bringing your experience has been. And so we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about mentor selection and mentor qualities and that collective responsibility. Having well-trained mentors and access to them, whether they have a job description, helping them to understand the confidential nature of mentoring. It's so important that the mentor-mentee relationship is confidential, for them to engage in those conversations where we're inviting trust and risk taking. Having that piece there, also having the active listening piece for them. A mentor should always demonstrate active listening with their mentors, engaging in those conversations, and how that can be engaged in the classroom and additional supports, even for special education and EL learners, thinking about the different roles when you're selecting a mentor, and building that cadre of mentors. We'll often talk about how it's nice to have a pool of mentors in your building or in your district that you can pull from and lean into, so that as your hiring needs change, you can go look and see what expertise and opportunities teachers have that can build and support those teachers. For example, if you're hiring a special education or an EL teachers, those roles have an additional component to them where they're acting as an advocate beyond the instruction that they're providing. They're acting as an advocate for the teachers, for the families, for the student connecting in the general education classroom. They're also even acting as a manager. So you may have a new teacher in a classroom and have an experienced paraeducator working with that teacher. So they need to have some understanding of how to be a people manager as well. And that may not be covered in their pre-service program or in their opportunities. So thinking about those qualities, when you're pairing a mentor to them, how can that person help them even beyond the instruction of the classroom?
And that reminds me too, Jen, when we're thinking about CTE teachers, a lot of CTE teachers are coming straight from the workforce or the business side of things and may not have already gone through a teacher preparation program. So thinking about how can we serve our CTE new teachers as well, and what do they need to know if they're not enrolled in a teacher prep program at the time. And that leads to our emergency certification teachers too, especially in our smaller rural districts that are having trouble finding certificated teachers. They will often hire emergency certificates or teachers with emergency certificates, and they're going to need an extra layer of support as well. And sometimes that means that we might have an official mentor, but then we also have some unofficial mentors that can guide them on specific parts of their job. Somebody who's taught the same grade level or the same content as they have. And so thinking not just about one mentor for that person, but how can we use official and unofficial mentors to support new teachers as well.
You're getting right at the collective responsibility and how we need to build a network of support. I always imagine someone walking on a tightrope, and there's lots of ways you can fall off a tightrope if you just have support on either end. But if we're able to weave support and develop that collective responsibility where everyone, the culture of our district and our school is to support new teachers, then we build that net that can provide more support underneath of them and catch them when there are those difficult moments. I think back to some experiences I've had or been in where, what do we do? What can we do to support a new teacher when we think about the classroom assignment that they have, when we think about where that classroom is located? Do we have the ability to pull them inside of a building, or do we have to put them in a portable? Or where is that classroom placed? Is it next to the office? Is it nearby support? Or is it down at the end of the hall away from everyone else? Are they with their team, or are they further away? So all the little things that we can do actually will add up to a big difference. Even with I think about, the classroom environment and the materials that we leave for teachers. Coming into a new classroom, what kind of resources are there, or have other teachers, what is the culture? How supportive is the culture of the building to provide for that teacher around, maybe not giving them the wobbly bean table.
Right. Yes, giving them the nice furniture. And I think you hit the nail on the head with placement in terms of, can they be inside the building? Often our new teachers are the last thought in terms of where we're going to put this new classroom. And really, those new teachers deserve to be connected to those who are strong supporters around them.
Mm-hmm. So I have a list in front of me of things that I would put down as mentor qualities that I would be looking for if I was growing my mentors, and thinking about who I might place them next to if I was going to place them next to a mentor or near. But looking at someone who is learning focused, and has those engages in coaching. Sometimes it's not, the mentor is not always the strong classroom teacher. It's a different set of skills and dispositions. And so just because someone is an amazing, fantastic teacher does not always mean they're going to be a fantastic mentor. So looking at their professionalism, their ability to do confidentiality and to be confidential, the ability to engage in reflective conversations, and thinking about asset mindsets. Are they looking at the strengths of a new teacher and how they can build on those strengths and how they can grow them? And do they have some ability to have those difficult conversations? Sometimes we have to lean in and have those conversations about how we can grow, and can they frame that in that asset and that growth mindset to do that work? So I think, and always, working on setting goals. So
goals. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think goal setting is an important part of that, and that definitely can come also from looking at our teaching frameworks or our state criteria as well, and setting some goals from those frameworks with new teachers.
Yeah. I know some districts, as they're looking at developing and growing their cadre, what are some benefits that you can develop in your mentors that they can take back and they get ongoing professional development to grow as a leader? And then it's a transferable skill. A lot of the questioning and a lot of the conversation skills actually transfer back to the classroom and how we engage with students. And there's a strong connection to the district initiatives and the school improvement goals you may have. Mentors also become part of that message and part of that, so that builds in your efficacy as well. So thinking about what you might have to offer within your staff. Let's take a look at a couple of the questions from the analysis tool, and we're going to invite invite you all to share in the chat. It's really our only way to connect with you at the moment, so please feel free to use the chat. But for yourself, to what degree do you think does your district or your school match mentors with beginning educators based on their experience, skills, and expertise? So as you're thinking about how you match mentors or how you with beginning educators, what those connections are, a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or if you want to share a little bit about how you're doing it, if you'd like to write a little bit more, please do.
And remember that if you're not at a 4 or 5, that's okay. This is a starting place, and we can grow from there. But I think a lot of us might fall into that refining or sustaining category in a lot of our schools as well.
And I know we also tend to be we tend to see progress lower, so we tend to rate ourselves a little lower. But, are you defining who and what needs to be done in the district? Are you developing your mentors and having those conversations around who are our mentors, where are we growing, and how are we creating belonging? Or are you refining? Are you starting to have additional mentors in training so that your mentors can have a rest year, or those opportunities? Are you sustaining and thinking about continuity and how the program exists in many people? And how it responds to future needs? Are you starting to collect data and information and think about how you're going to respond to future needs?
So I'm seeing some 2s and 4s, and I know sometimes the size of the district is another reason for having a cadre of mentors that's ready to go. And if you're a smaller district or more rural, it can be difficult to find that set of mentors. And so we're going to talk more about this later as well, but you might consider partnering with other districts if you are a smaller district. and thinking of some creative and innovative ways to do that.
There were a few districts that I've seen where they had a cooperative for special education. And so they were leaning across district lines. When they had a new teacher in one district, they would use the classroom for the other teacher in the neighboring district to support that teacher. And so creating some of that calibration even beyond your own community, your school community. Let's take a look at the next question. To what degree does your district or school inform beginning educators about district and school culture and the culture of the larger community? So as you're thinking about how you connect them, how do you share your school identity and your district identity and even the community as they're coming into the neighborhood? They're coming in. How do you make those connections?
And again, that 1 to 5 scale is what we're using. And where do you think we are or you are in sharing about the culture of the larger community? I noticed something on here on our notes, Jen. You had something about a drive around, looking at the neighborhoods that we draw from. And I have to say that was one of the most powerful things that principal that I was speaking about earlier did for the new teachers my first year. Was we drove around and looked at where are we drawing our students from? What are the neighborhoods like? And that gave us quite a bit of information, just learning more about the community.
The drive arounds, that's one I hear often, because you really do get to see where your students come from and what the neighborhoods are like and what some of the challenges are that they might be coming, whether they live on a hill, whether they live far out, and where these places are, what the bus ride might be like. And those opportunities to really understand what's happening and how that might affect your schedule when students get in. If they've been riding the bus for 30 or 40 minutes, maybe they need an opportunity to stretch or some movement. So that really can be powerful for the teachers. Even inviting in, thinking about orientations and other opportunities, inviting student panels in, having the 4th grade students write letters to the new 3rd grade teacher or something like that, where they can share the experience of what it was like, or talk about their opportunities. Even a virtual fair, even. This was one I've seen a couple of school districts try, where back in the days when we could have tables in a gymnasium, but even virtual, but have breakout rooms or have a fair of tables where teachers can go around and connect with different parts of your community. Who is at your table and who is that support network for teachers? Thinking about, I used to have a diagram of a table, imagining a round table and then the empty seats around this table. Who would be in your table for a new teacher and who would be there to help them and connect them with the resources and opportunities they need? And that made a great diagram. I used to go in when I was mentoring and I would find those on the inside of cupboards. Teachers would show me that they had saved that and put that inside their cupboard.
That's really neat. I like that. And speaking of that too, just considering what the unique characteristics are of your community and your culture, and maybe some of those challenges that new teachers might face within that culture is important to communicate. Sometimes we need to communicate that in a very delicate way, and make sure that they have a chance to ask questions or know how to handle certain situations. Again, thinking back to my first year, we had a very large military population at the school that I was first teaching at, and that brought with it some unique challenges as well, with parents being deployed and coming back, and how to help students through that process.
I was that military child.
I know you were. That's one of the reasons I brought it up.
The mid-year move. So why don't we give folks an opportunity to look at a resource, one that we have found really, really helpful. So I'm going to jump to our next slide. Lindsay's going to drop this link into the chat. And what we're going to do is we're going to invite you to take like 3 or 4 minutes to read this article, and then also on your note taker, maybe to put a few things that have resonated with you about belonging. And then we're going to invite you to share in the chat in just a little bit. Since we can't do a room and a share around, we're going to use the power of the chat. So please take 3 or 4 minutes to look over the resources in the chat, and then we'll come back and share. I'm picturing in my mind that she's reaching out probably by email or by walk-arounds and walkthroughs and visiting and sharing. I think, Shelley's right. We take for granted sometimes what we think teachers know. And so inviting veteran teachers to present and to share. So it's not always the admin. It goes back to that collective responsibility. Absolutely. Striking up conversations.
Just popping your head in. How are things going? I mean, that can be having just someone to talk to about how things are going can be such a game changer for new teachers that are having a bad day or having a great day and want to share that too.
So let's go a little bit beyond the sense of belonging, and let's talk about efficacy and how we can influence efficacy.
And I'm not sure if we mentioned at the beginning, but the 3 things that help retain our new teachers are that sense of belonging, sense of efficacy, and sense of support. And that's why we're really focusing on these 3 today. So on your note taker, go ahead and go to that section of efficacy where it says my understanding and experience. And we'll give you about 1 minute to reflect on efficacy and write down what your understanding is so far. All right, that's been about a minute, and feel free to come back to this later too. So what is teacher efficacy? What does that all mean? It is the idea or the belief that educators hold of their own ability. So how do they believe, or do they believe that they have the ability to positively influence student learning? And if we think about this in terms of other jobs or careers and teams, thinking about a medical team, I was talking with Jen before our session, and I said, my husband and I have often talked about how if somebody's doing surgery on us, we want them to really have a good sense of self-efficacy and feel good about what they're doing. But then in that operating room, you have the whole team and everybody plays their role, but they're all there to support each other as well. So thinking about some of those attributes of teams, medical teams, sports teams, military, what are some of the key attributes of teams that can help build this sense of efficacy? Thank you for placing that question in the chat, Jen.
My pleasure. It's funny, we're talking about teams and the key attributes, and I'm thinking about being able to support them. And so everyone has a coach that they work with. You may have I'm thinking of football, and I'm not 100% on my football. So if I start mixing it up, somebody please correct me in the chat. But thinking about the special teams and the coaches that they have that are geared towards their particular need for the offense and the defense, and that's about as far as I'm going to go. But thinking about who their coaches are and what skills and dispositions they're trying to teach those players. So how does that coach different from another coach, and how do you build those teams? So how can the different players on a team and the different roles support each other? And having a team can give you confidence. Absolutely, Kayla. They are your cheerleaders when you need them, and they are your confidants and support team when you have questions. They're who you feel like you can go back to. Absolutely.
and that person alongside you saying, great job, you did this really well, because sometimes we don't like to point that out for ourselves, especially people who are just starting out in education don't want to point out what they're doing well all the time. So somebody letting them know can help build that sense of efficacy.
Yeah. Thinking about how when teachers have goals and they have those pieces that they're trying to do, when they believe in themselves and when they have this ability, when they have that innate, that knowledge that they think they can do this, they have that efficacy, that affects how much the effort they put into achieving their goals. I think about, when I have an assignment or a task that I'm trying to do, or if my husband's giving me a task to do, like build a gazebo, looking on, I'm thinking about what I need to do and can I do this and do I have the effective skills to do this? And as the task starts getting broken down and he hands me the hammer and he says, we're just going to build this corner post, and he's taking the whole gazebo down to the corner post and we're going to build just this piece. I start gaining confidence and I start thinking I can do it. And you know what? I actually do hit a couple of the nails straight on. I still hit a couple, but I can hit them straight on. But as he's breaking that down and as I gain in confidence, I start believing I can do this and I start expanding that. And that works just like in a classroom where teachers feel like they do have, maybe their morning time goes really, really well. What are they doing there that they can transfer into the afternoon, or what's working in their circle time that they can transfer over? So how can you take their assets and their strengths and build on those and push them on?
And I love what Nicole is saying in the chat. Fill me in as maybe a veteran on things that they know that I don't know much about. So if that person comes in with a skill or practice as a veteran that I am not quite as familiar with, draw on that knowledge. And sometimes that can build that belief that, oh, there are things I do know. I know as a student teacher, I had a team that I student taught with, and I would say, I know I'm a student teacher, and they were great about saying, hey, Lindsay, there's a lot that you know that coming out of college, you have just learned about that we don't. So we want you to share that too, and don't feel like you're just, quote, a student teacher. So I think that's a good point, Nicole. Thank you.
I think this past year was a good indicator of that too, where we had a lot of new teachers who came in with a lot of technology skills or familiarity with learning platforms that the rest of us were playing catch up to. And so leaning into their areas of strength and value, I think one caution I might put in is to always make sure that we consider for new teachers that they may have difficulty saying no sometimes because they really want to be a part of and to be included. And so really balancing the asks sometimes that we provide of teachers, maybe limiting some of those things and even saying, I know you know this and I want you to help here, but maybe don't join this committee. This year I want you to focus on instruction and maybe you help us with an LMS system or something, but to be very careful about how extended we put them when they're trying so hard to master all the things that they're learning in their first couple of years.
And I loved what you were saying about that gazebo example, because I think that's important for our new teachers as well. Let's just focus on this one thing or this one part of our classroom or our instruction, and then it doesn't seem so overwhelming sometimes. I wanted to touch a little bit on what Shelley mentioned, that sometimes as a veteran teacher, it's difficulty considering ideas from green teachers. We've always done it this way. Yes, I totally understand where you're coming from. And I think it is something that we can work on. I also will say that efficacy is not just about instruction. And I think you were the one earlier in the chat, Shelley, that mentioned that we have this ongoing series where we can learn about conferences, open house, leading clubs, what's the lunch procedure. And our teachers need to know about all of those other things too, so that they can feel like they're successful in all parts of their role. I know with the new teacher this year, I wasn't in their building, but I was their mentor. And she came to me and said, I don't know where the agenda for clubs are, and I'm supposed to be leading this club and help. And I couldn't help because I had no idea where the agenda was either, but at least I could match her up with the right person that could show her that.
So thinking about all that you're talking about, I keep thinking back to the importance of relationships, and there's 5 components to a strong relationship, and that's that expressing care. And that's exactly what you did in that situation. You listened and you heard and you cared. So you gave her support and gave her feedback on how to navigate some systems. And so when we do that for teachers, we're building that strength and that own internal piece. And also challenging growth is another piece when we challenge them. So my husband challenges me when I have to build when we built the gazebo. And so having those high expectations, yes, you can do this. And yes, you will be able to do that. And when there is a challenge, how do we scaffold that and help them through that? That providing support, asking them to setting a goal and then working through the different aspects of it and then helping them achieve the goals and then celebrating the successes. I think oftentimes it's easy to go ahead and set a new goal, but we actually need to stop and take time to value the pieces where we're achieving those goals and we're going, yes, we got that piece. Sharing the power. We've talked a lot about, Shelley's mentioned it in the chat with the sometimes those early career teachers and our seasoned teachers, and how there can be a little bit of a difference in how we do things and how we can create that culture and create those opportunities to share some of that expertise. It was interesting last year. New teachers were reporting out that they were extremely connected to building principles last year. And so when we did a mid-year survey, teachers were saying they were more connected to principles. And I was thinking, wow, teachers are feeling more connected to those principles right now. What are they doing differently, and how can we keep that going forward so that they stay that connected? And thinking about possibilities and opportunities for teachers, just share expertise of those areas of talent that they have.
And I see Jesse put in the chat, speaking of expanding possibilities, their staff created a Google Classroom so people could ask questions or share resources or successes. And it was a great opportunity for people to learn in a low risk way, but good to share their skills or show off skills as well. And acknowledging that, yes, being new is tough, especially if you were new in the last year and a half. It's been especially tough, and being connected to those principles was something that maybe our new teachers, that's all they had. We couldn't pop in for those quick chats in person. We were working maybe on Zoom from home, but it's been a year of expanding possibilities, that's for sure.
One quick thing before we go to our next slide. This has been one of my little soapbox things for new teachers and early career teachers. The year 3 teachers that are coming into districts this year have yet to have an opportunity to experience a full year in a normal, quote unquote, normal average classroom. They left in year 1 at the end of March. And then last year was filled with changes and different expectations around what their classrooms would be. And so even as a year 3 teacher, we have some teachers that are still gaining experience and are still early career teachers. So supporting them is going to be a big task going forward.
All right, moving into our questions regarding efficacy. To what degree does your district or school have a coordinated multi-year learning plan for beginning educators? Coordinated multi-year learning plan for beginning educators. Shelley says a 5. I am super excited to hear that, and I would love to hear something that you're doing as far as this multi-year plan.
And one can be an unaware that you may not be involved in that school, in that district, or in that work. Sorry, watching the chat at the same time when I'm trying to talk. You may just not be aware that it exists. It's not a right or wrong. It's just an awareness of where you are and what you think is happening. And Shelley Bethel is doing a lot of good work. Jessie is, still pretty new to her district and is thinking about that. But she's aware of where her district was, and yay, Bethel. Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. So our key stakeholders and building administrators need to be able to discuss how we need to build our new teacher skills and build a plan for professional learning that addresses that trajectory of learning for new educators. And we also need to provide some just-in-time learning opportunities for our new teachers, our early career teachers as well. And I think we mentioned that too when we were talking about preparing them in our orientation for the first few days, first few weeks, and making sure that they knew how to prioritize what should be done on those days.
And I think even as you're looking at your year-long plan to build on what you're talking about, thinking about what teachers will need in September and what they're going to need in December is very different. Or even thinking about when they come back in January, what might they need that would be just in time, to think about how they want to change or how they want to do in their classroom. Thinking about the seasons of assessment that we have, and different opportunities there too. So we'll share in the chat. There is a link in the standards for induction that are shared by OSPI. And on pages 39 and 40, there's actually a monthly kind of calendar. We're not going to go into that in today's session, but just know on page 39 and 40, if you look inside there, there is a breakdown of calendar by month of some opportunities and considerations for teachers.
And those standards for beginning educator induction it's a great resource, but it can be overwhelming. And so we're not going to dive too far in today, but I think when I saw that calendar, that made me pretty excited as well.
So I just shared our second question in the section.
Go ahead, ma'am.
It's all yours.
To what degree does your district or school engage in reflective practices that allow new teachers to self-assess? And I think that being reflective is an important component that we want to build in our new teachers. So to what degree does your school or district do this? Okay, I love it when people jump in with a 5. I want to know what you're doing.
Shelley, that's a good point. Sometimes it's available and offered, but they may not follow through. Your comment makes me wonder, what barriers might they be experienced? They are so overwhelmed. And so thinking, how is a team, when your stakeholders, your induction team is working in your district, thinking about what they're saying, and Jessie's giving it the up vote. And the mentors and the coaches can help with that work and giving them that space. I think it's important too for principals and even a district culture to provide and protect that time, to almost guard it for them so that they can do that. Building level supports. Absolutely.
And the observation and feedback cycles can also help provide and protect that time in a beginning teacher schedule to be able to reflect and self-assess. And I think that sometimes within those cycles, we point out as mentors what they're doing well, but it's also a good time for them to reflect on what are you doing well? What's working for you? Because that's a good starting place when people are a little bit worried about being reflective and sharing that with others.
So we have another resource. Lindsay, while I'm putting the link in, do you want to share a little bit about this one?
I do. So this is from Cult of Pedagogy. I don't know how many of you have been on that site. It's called OMG Becky, PD is getting so much better. And when you dive into this resource in just a minute, when we give you time to do that and then write on what you're wondering about or some notes about it, it might be helpful to go down to the very bottom, because she gives a visual of all the different kinds of PD and a quick little synopsis of what those opportunities entail. So you might scroll down to the bottom just for this first glance at this resource and then go back up and read some parts that you're interested in. So I think we're going to give you about 3 minutes. Is that correct, Jen? About 3 minutes to dive into the resource and write down what you're wondering or what some notes about efficacy in this particular resource entail. And we will see you back about 3:31.
3:32, we're almost at the end of the minute.
Okay, thank you for keeping track for me. 3:32, we'll see you back. While they're gathering thoughts on that, too, Jen, I apologize to those of you who might be distracted in the background by my dog that's laying on the bed. Using a new platform, we found that we couldn't have any kind of screen behind us to block things out. So if you see sweet little Bower jumping up on the bed or behind me, I apologize.
He's pretty awesome. So when we were preparing our presentation and thinking about this, we were looking up efficacy and teacher efficacy, and we came across a curious sense that really ties in the first two together. If you tie in the sense of belonging and even the next section that we're going to talk about, support, and that is the teacher collective efficacy. And John Hattie had done some research, and a typical year's growth for his effect sizes is 0.4, and teacher efficacy, particularly collective teacher efficacy as a school works together, can have an impact of 1.57. So it can have the effect of multiple years growth for students. So thinking just how important that sense of efficacy and that sense of belonging and how that can impact not only what our teachers feel about their careers, going back to being our dream makers, but also thinking about how that can impact our students too. So what we do for teachers, we also do for our students.
For our students, that's right. And one thing that we also didn't touch on that we had talked about was the idea of efficacy in terms of developing relationships with students. And I know that sometimes we can have difficult relationships that we're trying to figure out, especially as a new teacher. How do I go about working with this student? And I think that's where it's important too to bring in some of the trauma-informed practices or culturally responsive teaching that helps us better relate to those students who may be facing some challenges.
Absolutely. Which leads us right in to support and thinking about how we support students or our teachers. When you're this will be the last section of our note taker. So in that first section or in that last section, go ahead and put down the things that resonate with you about support, how you're connecting teachers with support, and maybe some of the collaborative practices that you might be engaging in. And Nancy, you are spot on with your comment about the being a champion in the classroom, but still not rowing in the same direction. That's that principal role and finding principals that can support that work and lead that work is a key part of that collective efficacy and that collective responsibility. So I'm just going to give everyone just a moment to write. Yes, it does. It definitely helps. So this last section of support This is how we create. I think we were talking earlier about that tightrope when we have just two parts of support, where we have the new teacher and we have our mentor, or we have whoever's leading that work. But when we involve different stakeholders, and when we involve that community of our school, and even community beyond the PTA or the PTO, if you have a parent organization, but how we can weave that web of support and how we can create that collective responsibility for them is so key. And it can be in the places that you least expect it. It can be, making a connection with all the staff in your building, secretaries, uh, school nurses, having they understand the relationships with kids, who are their frequent flyers, and how can they communicate information to a new teacher about what to look for, when to send someone to the nurse or when to the office. Thinking about custodians, and how to leave a classroom at the end of the day, and definitely no glitter, right? We're still a no glitter piece too. But thinking about all the people in your building that a teacher might come into contact with, and with your students, and to get those opportunities together to gather and to learn what makes their world and their piece easier, because then we all work together in the school, and so it builds that reciprocal arrangements.
I can't tell you how many times when I was a principal, I had new teachers go ask our office coordinator about that procedure, about that student, and our office coordinator was always so knowledgeable about those little things. And it was hugely important for our new teachers.
Mm-hmm. And Jesse's bringing up a really good point in the chat about having a cohort for new teachers and finding a group for them to be able to share. Even thinking about how they can front load together, or how they can commiserate and ask questions. Sometimes creating a space where they can ask those questions that, we don't know what we don't know, but we're kind of afraid to ask in a staff meeting. What does IEP stand for? What does 504? What is the difference between these two? How do I do a clock hour? How do I do the salary scale? All these little questions that may not necessarily be something they want to ask in a meeting, but it's wanting to know them. Yes, all the acronyms. But how do we build that conversation and a space for that? And so really giving them, and if you only have a couple teachers, maybe finding another network that you can connect to, or with your neighboring districts. Particularly in some of our rural and remote districts, you share teachers back and forth. I think I was reading something the other day just about the border between Washington and Oregon. And the transfer rate there is 7 times greater than in most teacher retention. So teachers go back and forth across the state line there. So thinking about who you might be sharing teachers with, and maybe forming a partnership there and doing some collaborative training and opportunities there, so that there is, when you're getting a teacher from that district, they've had similar experiences and trainings to you. So, okay. I want to know what an LRE is.
Least restrictive environment.
Thank you.
Yes, you do.
I was thinking of LMS.
Yes, and I was just thinking with Nicole, that's a really good example. What is the least restrictive environment, and why? And which one is the least restrictive environment for students that are on an IEP? That's a really complicated concept, and for our new teachers as well. When you were talking about, Oregon and Washington at the border going back and forth, I taught in Vancouver for a year, and that was so true. There's also some hesitancy sometimes to collaborate with our rival district, especially if you are in a secondary school where sports are pretty important. But, those rival districts have so much to offer sometimes, and great teachers and people that can help us grow too.
So I'm looking at Nicole's question about the expectation of the individual and to seek out maybe. But sometimes I found with new teachers, they're a little bit hesitant sometimes to connect with others. Like even a coach in a district, I often would offer to facilitate the first meeting between myself and a mentee, and inviting a coach in to talk to them if I knew that there was a particular need for ELA or science support. or something they had a question about. Sometimes just that in-person bridge building and connection can then, and then you can step out of it and let them have that access. But sometimes they're hesitant to write that first email asking for support. And so sometimes that in-person connection can be a big piece of that culture and support for them. I'm thinking about PLCs too, and how we can utilize the power of PLC in some of our districts and those partnerships.
And common planning times. I mentioned at the beginning that was a big piece for me as a new teacher, to have a common planning time with my team, my fourth grade team. But also, if you don't have that common planning time, how can we arrange that? So that somebody who's teaching the same content or same grade level, maybe 3 half days a year, can sit down and plan with the beginning educators as well. So those collaborative practices in our school are important, and our new teachers and beginning educators are often like sponges, gathering up that information anywhere they can get it sometimes.
So let's go ahead and jump over to our questions for this section. To what degree does your district or school foster that collaborative school culture and the professional learning communities that will support the growth of all teachers? Are you unaware? Not sure how it's happening? Still working out developing the details? Most people are refining, continue to improve the practice. See lots of threes. And then how can we move to sustaining and integrating, and how we can move to those systems-wide pieces? Let's go ahead and ask this next one too. To what degree do district staff across your departments hold that collective sense of responsibility for the success of the beginning educator and their students? Is that still a developing in your district, or is that refining, sustaining?
And sometimes Shelley, says, good question, not sure, I even know. And sometimes it's just taking the time to sit down and define everybody's roles and their responsibilities, and helping new teachers and helping them build success.
And even asking teachers as you end a school year or come back, what do we do to support? How do we communicate our culture and create that support for teachers, new teachers? What are we doing? And asking teachers to identify, your current teachers, what are they doing to support new teachers? How can they contribute? And I think a lot of times it's just something that we just kind of keep doing and aren't even necessarily aware of, but asking them how they're doing that.
And drawing on those people that we talked about before too, to help provide that information of what our new teachers need to know: office coordinator, maintenance staff, etc. What is it that we can all do to support those beginning educators?
So I think our last resource today is called Finding Time for New Teachers to Thrive. And I did not put the link in the notes on this slide.
Okay, that's okay. I can grab it. If you give me just a second, and I will put that in the chat.
Thank you. So thinking about, that protecting that time for teachers, but also giving them that time and then connecting them. And then it feels like a lot, but then also how do we break it into those bite sizes? Just like I'm going back to my gazebo because that kind of resonates with me, but building it one leg at a time. So which piece do we give them, and how do we do those supports? What do we need to give them in the now, those first days? What do we need to give them in the first weeks, and what do they need in their first month? And thinking about how we can support them. I know for me, one of the key things was to meet my new teacher before the school year started, and to have an opportunity to visit their classroom and walk through and engage with them. I had a teacher that was one of my mentees was trying to design a classroom layout, and it looked amazing. And so then she and I took the time before the school year started, and she and I were sitting there working through it. And I said, let's pretend to be students. Okay, you sit at that table behind me and I'll sit here. Let's try to go get supplies. And so she and I walked through how the classroom would run. And suddenly we found it didn't work. Rethink it. It was beautiful. It looked beautiful, but we had to walk through those processes. So really slowing down and taking the time even before the school year starts to support a teacher. So it really does extend beyond that instructional time, but how we're supporting them.
And hopefully this year we can do some of those things.
Yeah. So let's take about, I think maybe 2 minutes for this section, 2 or 3 minutes for this article. We'll go with 2. And then let's come back together and share some of our thinking, and hopefully we'll have some time for some questions and a couple more resources to share. So let's come back at 3:49. Well, speaking of resources, we have one more.
And I just put it in the chat for you. We promised you that we would give you the whole analysis tool in terms of attracting, sustaining, and supporting new teachers. And so we just put a link to that in the chat. And again, it forces you to make a copy. And in that, you will see the induction component that we talked about earlier, as well as more questions for efficacy, belonging, and support. And you will see some more resources in each section as well. So you have this analysis tool now that you can take a longer look at, a deeper dive. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
So that tool is something that we developed from several resources, OSPI, the Standards for Induction and Mentors, and then also a couple of resources outside of that. There was a particular issue of EL Magazine that came out in September of 2019, and we're going to put that in the chat as well. But this magazine is available digitally, and if you're looking for some bite-sized pieces that teachers may need, or you're trying to build that capacity in your stakeholders team or raise awareness around certain pieces, these are some great bite-sized opportunities. There's a letter to new teachers, how to open with respect from day one, how principals can support new teachers, fundamentals of backwards planning. The list goes on and on and on. It's a really excellent resource for that. I've also been looking in Fisher and Fry's Teacher Credibility and Collective Efficacy Playbook. And I'm just holding this one up over here. But it's one that I found helpful as far as coming up with tasks and things that I might do with staff or with mentees and mentors to build that efficacy and help them facilitate their awareness and own their own work. So that would be that.
I put a link to purchase that in the chat as well if you're interested in purchasing that. Okay. And if you find the Google Doc with our analysis tool is not working, once again, I'm going to assume it's working unless somebody says differently.
So we did just a quick dive today, just 90 minutes, but we're actually doing an extended 4-part series through that you can register for on PD Enroller at session 116223. And we're going to be talking about the first 2-hour session will be on fostering culture and community, and that'll be next week. And then we're also going to spend 2 hours with focusing on instructional orientation. And then that'll be all in August. And then September, we're going to be looking at supporting mentors and then also school improvement, what teachers need around support for school improvement. And our goal is that within each of these 2-hour sessions that teams would be able to walk away with some tools and resources that they can take back to their districts as well. So,
and consider, where do we want to work on improving our supports for new teachers?
And we've put our contact in here. I'm Jen and Lindsay, and Daniel couldn't join us today. He had a vacation plan during this, but he was definitely with us behind the scenes. So we want to give him a shout out too. If you have any questions, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes and in the chat if there's anything you want to talk about. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.